So let's start off with a bit of an odd question. Who here has heard of the Wombles? Okay, so there's, right, Mark. Okay, Annabelle, you're probably the youngest person in here who's got their hand up, so no one else has heard of the Wombles. Okay, so they're probably before my time too. I think they're, it's a kids' TV show from, I think maybe the 70s or something, or the 80s, but I watched replays of it when I was a kid. And basically it's these furry creatures that sort of live in Wimbledon Common, they live in a park, and they go around picking up people's litter, and then they make creations out of it and inventions and stuff. But it doesn't really matter that you don't know what the Wombles are. If you're interested, I'm sure on YouTube you could go and have a look later. But yeah, that's a problem for later. But the thing I want to focus on is there's a theme song, and it goes, underground, overground, wombling free. So I was just, I was preparing this talk, and that kind of popped into my head, and I was like, God, what is this? Why am I thinking about the Wombles? I'm trying to think of a talk for Youth Church, whatever. But it kind of got me thinking about other unders and overs. So you could have underachievement, overachievement, under-exaggerate, over-exaggerate, although someone pointed out to me that over-exaggeration is technically just an exaggeration of exaggeration, and so it's kind of a pointless thing to say. But either way, there's many different unders and overs, and I just want to look at a pair today. And so that's underwhelmed and overwhelmed. You know that feeling when you walk up a big hill or a mountain maybe? Has anyone walked up a mountain before? Snowdon? No? Oh, okay, some people walked up mountains, that's fun. But you walk up this big hill, so much effort, you make it to the top, expecting to see this beautiful view, and then it's all cloudy and foggy. You get there, and it's just kind of disappointing. All that effort, and you don't really get the payoff from it. Or maybe you've got a friend who's been talking non-stop about a film or a TV show. They're like, oh, it's so good. They rave about it all the time. And then you watch it, and it's just kind of doesn't meet expectations. You're like, I know you love it so much, but it just feels kind of underwhelming because it's something that you expect to be so exciting, and it's just not. Or I was talking to my small group about this on Friday. You know when you like open a jar and it makes that really satisfying like popping noise? Oh, it's great. So my housemate the other day, he opened a new jar of honey. And we were waiting, it's going to be a great noise, but then it had plastic around the rim, and so it was a really disappointing, didn't make a nice pop, and it was really underwhelming because you're expecting that great sound. And so there's lots of things in life that we can be underwhelmed. We expect things to be exciting and great, and it just doesn't quite live up. It can leave us feeling a bit disappointed and flat. And that can be true for our faith as well. And perhaps this year, that's been in a whole new way. Maybe you've been praying about something or heard something from God, like this is going to happen, this feels big, and then a pandemic happens and nothing has quite gone to plan. Perhaps, I know for me before, I've been praying about things, and I've thought that, if I prayed that it would happen, and then just I haven't seen God work in the way that I expected him to, and that can feel disappointing too. It's often we talk about prayer in church, and we're like, yeah, God's amazing, and God is amazing, but when we're praying about something and we don't see what we expect to, what we want to see, that can be really underwhelming, and that is normal, and that's fine. Like we, as humans, we do get underwhelmed sometimes, but I don't know what I'm talking about now. Oh yeah, and we see this in the Bible too. We see disciples of Jesus getting underwhelmed as well. So there's one example of this in Luke chapter 24. I don't think we have it on the screen, but you can just take my word for it that that's where it is. I promise I did look it up in advance. And so it's just after Jesus has died, he's been crucified, and he's risen from the dead, but the disciples haven't actually seen him yet, or some of them have. But we're on the road to Emmaus, these two disciples, they're walking along this road, long old journey, and they've heard that Jesus has risen from the dead, but they're kind of confused what it means, and they're just walking along chatting. And then basically as they're walking along, Jesus appears to them. And you think, oh, great, that's exciting. Like they were, a bit sad, they've lost their best friend, or one of their close friends, and then Jesus appears, woo! But then we're told that they're kept from recognizing him. So I don't know if he had like a really good fake moustache, or maybe they needed to get their eyes checked or something. Well, probably more likely that we don't exactly know how or why. I'm sure theologically there's some reasoning behind it, but they don't recognize Jesus. But he joins them on their walk. And I'm just going to read from the lighting is quite bad. I'm going to read from verse 19. So they're walking along, Jesus joins them, and he basically wants to know what they're chatting about. And he says this, "What are you talking about?" Jesus asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, to God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, this is the third day since this all took place. So that's Luke 24:19-21. I think I just want to focus on the words in verse 21, but we had hoped. You know, even though we know now that Jesus, in that dying and that resurrection, in that sacrificing himself for our sins and our mistakes, that was the way he was redeeming Israel. That was the method that God had chosen. That was the only way. That was the good way. They couldn't see that, even though Jesus had told them in advance, look, I'm going to die, but I'm going to rise again. They couldn't see that's how Jesus was redeeming Israel. That was how Jesus was saving them. And so from their perspective, they were like, well, he's just died. So he said he was going to redeem us. And yet, he's dead. What do we do now? And I'm sure they were feeling underwhelmed and disappointed. But we had hoped. And we can feel that too. And also, you can't really blame them. Imagine, so they expected that he would redeem Israel by overthrowing the Roman oppressors. There'd be freedom in that way. And it would just be almost a short term, this is great, an overthrowing of the Roman leaders. And so if the person you think is going to overthrow these people then gets crucified by them, that doesn't line up with how you think it's going to happen, then of course you're going to be a bit confused. And I think that's often the thing when we feel underwhelmed or disappointed, that we let our preconceptions of what we think God's going to do stop us from seeing what he's actually doing. Because obviously, Jesus dying was the best thing and the only way to be able to save us, to bring us into freedom. But from their perspective, it was underwhelming. Even Jesus' disciples were underwhelmed. Even though they were close to him and spent lots of time with him, they were underwhelmed. So now let's look at the flip side of this. I'm sure you've all been overwhelmed at some point in your life. Maybe it's to do with the amount of coursework or homework you've got. Maybe it's a really difficult situation that just feels a bit too much. And these things pile on top of each other, and it can be difficult to know what to do with it all. I have lost where I am, but that's okay. Maybe right now you're sat here listening to me chat about one walls and underwhelmed and stuff, but actually your brain is elsewhere. Maybe you're like fully in overdrive, overthinking and worrying about something else, because that's what happens when we get overwhelmed. It almost consumes us. I remember there was one time where I had a full-on messy meltdown over some carrots, and I can laugh about this now because it's quite funny. Like, carrots are clearly not that big of a deal. Don't cry over spilt milk, don't cry over carrots, that kind of thing. But at the time, it was kind of the final straw I had. So I was struggling to settle into university. I was finding it really stressful. There was loads of work and deadlines coming up. And if I'm honest, I was feeling quite lonely. And so I'd bought these carrots, and then I didn't have enough time to make what I was going to make with them, and I was like, they're going to go mouldy, and I just went into a spiral. I think that's even though the carrots themselves, it's just carrots, but I was fully and completely overwhelmed, and I just wanted to curl up into a ball and never talk to anyone or do anything, or even talk to God again, because that's the thing, when we get overwhelmed, the default is to just shut ourselves away from things. There's a Bible verse in Psalms which talks about this quite well. It says, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove, I would fly away and flee from this place, and I would go into the desert." Sometimes when things are overwhelming, we just want to run away and we want to hide. And we see this in the Bible as well with some other disciples. This is also after Jesus has risen from the dead. So he's been buried, he's in the tomb, and then early in the morning, Mary and Salome, they go and visit Jesus' tomb to go and anoint his body. And so they go and they got their spices, got everything prepared. We're told that it's just after sunrise, so it's really early in the morning, but they've got up because they know what they're going to do here. And obviously we know that they get to the tomb, and the tomb is empty. There's no one there. And then there's an angel that basically says to them, "Look, Jesus has risen. Go and tell the other disciples, this is exciting news. Don't be afraid. This is great." And obviously we know that they do go and talk to the disciples. We know that the word gets out, and then they meet Jesus in the days after that. But in Mark's gospel, the story's in all gospels, but in Mark's gospel, we're actually told that they don't do it straight away. So in Mark 16, verse 8, the angel has just said, "Go and tell the other disciples that Jesus is risen. This is good news." And then Mark 16, verse 8, it says this: "Trembling and bewildered, The women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. I mean, we can't blame them. It's early in the morning. They probably haven't had their Weetabix yet. They've lost their friend. They've gone to anoint the body, and then the body's gone, and it's overwhelming. They've been given this big responsibility. And yet we see that it's fair enough, they are overwhelmed. Even though they walked with Jesus and close with God, they let their fear and their overwhelmingness of the situation stop them from going and doing this thing. So we see both the cases of disciples we've looked at. We see that they're human. I mean, so often we can look at the Bible and be like, oh, the disciples, they followed Jesus, they did these great things, they went on and built this church. But actually, they're just humans. They were just humans like you and I. Because obviously, they were the first disciples, the ones that actually physically walked with Jesus. But as disciples of Jesus, like, they're just as much human as we are. They would just be like you and I. And I wonder if you can relate to these things, that feeling of underwhelmed or overwhelmed. Maybe both. I think particularly this last year has been quite difficult for that. It's a good job I numbered my pages, because otherwise we would be lost. But that's the funny thing about being underwhelmed and overwhelmed, is they're complete opposites, right? That's the whole point of overground, underground. You can't be overground and also be underground at the same time. That doesn't quite work. And the solution to being overground would be to burrow down and be underground, if you wanted to be underground. I don't know if you'd rather be in a... I'd personally rather be on a mountain than in a cave, but, you know, you might have your own opinion. Either way, underwhelmed and overwhelmed, they're normal feelings, we feel them all the time, but they are complete opposites. And yet, the solution to both is the overwhelmingness of God. You see, so often we treat overwhelming as this negative connotations. I'm so overwhelmed with emotions, so overwhelmed with everything that's going on. The hospital's overwhelmed. It's such a negative, it has such negative connotations. But when we're talking about God, the overwhelmingness of God is the best news ever. Words can never do God justice, because he is beyond all comprehension. His love and grace and mercy, they run so deeply that we can never reach the ends of them. You know, there is nothing that we can do to reach the extent of God's love. Even using the male pronoun is simply because as humans, that's all we can do. That's for our ease rather than saying anything about God, because he is so much bigger. If you just to go outside in nature and look at the vastness of the sky or the intricacy of a blade of grass, in that we can see how huge and magnificent and wonderful God is. He's overwhelming in every single aspect of the word. Did you know that? So I think personally, I love bees. I chat about them all the time. So bees, they do this thing called a waggle dance, and by performing this dance, a twist of the abdomen and the head and the direction they do it can tell the direction and the distance of a plant, of some flowers, over 3 miles away, just by doing a little wiggly dance. Isn't that so cool? That's incredible that there is so much intricacy and depth to the world, and God is so much bigger. He is so overwhelming. And don't even get me started on things beyond what we can see. As a physics student, just delving into things what makes up the atoms and the building blocks, how they interact with each other, and the fact that there's so much we don't know. All of that just fills me with awe, because there is a God who orchestrates it all. Even we can feel underwhelmed and overwhelmed, but God is so big. His mercy is new every morning. We read this in the Bible again and again. And there's a beautiful passage in Job, which sort of kind of says what I've been saying, but in a better way. I'm not going to go into the backstory of Job because it's quite long, and also I've been talking quite a lot. But basically, Job's entire life is turned upside down. He loses his family, he loses his home, he loses his possessions, his livelihood, everything. And most of the book is just him and his friends grappling with that. If you're interested, you can probably, there's plenty of things online and stuff that you can, if you're interested in the story of Job. Basically, the entire book is sort of building up to when is God going to speak? Because they're just chatting about it, but when is God going to speak? And then in chapter 38, God finally does speak. And I've chosen just a short passage from this, and I'm going to read it to you now. And that's Job 38, verses 27 to 37. I'm going to be reading from NLT version, so it'll be different to what's on the screen, but it's the same. If it confuses you, then just either listen or read, but yeah. Who sends rain to satisfy the parched ground and make the tender grass spring up? Does the rain have a father? Who gives birth to the dew? Who is the mother of the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? For the waters turn to ice as hard as rock, and the surface of the water freezes. Can you direct the movement of the stars, binding the cluster of the Pleiades, or loosening the cords of Orion? Can you direct the constellations through the seasons, or guide the bear with her cubs across the heavens? Do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? Can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? Who gives intuition to the heart and instinct to the mind? Who is wise enough to count all the clouds? Who can tilt the water jars of heaven? And it goes on like this. The rest of chapter 38, 39, 40, and 41, I think, all just, they're the same. It's God saying, look, who are you to know who I am? God is so, so vast. And we can never comprehend that. I could chat about this for days and days and days, and we'd never get to the bottom of it. Like, you could read these passages again and again. But what we see is that God is awesomely overwhelming. If you haven't got the picture yet, God is overwhelming, and that's exciting. And we see that like God is this huge, greater than all comprehension. But what's even more mind-blowing than that is that God, the one who directs the constellations and tilts the water jars of heaven, God chooses to love us. He cares about you and he cares about me more than we could ever know. Even though you could think, oh, well, if it's, God's tilting the water jars of heaven, what's he got to care about my carrots or my, insecurities? What he's got to care about everything that's going on in my life? But every single worry, every single disappointment, when you're feeling flat or dejected, when you're feeling everything at once or nothing at all, God knows it and God cares about it. God is invested in our lives so overwhelmingly, because he's invested because he wants to be. That's the most incredible thing about it. God doesn't have to spend time being with us. God didn't have to send his son so that we could be close to him and that we could have this freedom. God chooses to be. And it boggles me. Sometimes I'll just be standing, I'll just like, wow, like this is so cool. And on the road to Emmaus, when the disciples are feeling underwhelmed and dejected, Jesus walks with them, and we see that after they kind of say, we don't know what's going on, like we had hoped he'd done this, but this hasn't happened. Jesus then continues to walk with them, and he explains these things to them. And then they sort of get to their home, and he breaks bread with them. And once he breaks the bread, it's kind of symbolic when at the Passover, he also broke the bread in the same way. And at this point where Jesus breaks the bread, they recognize him. And when they recognize him, everything kind of falls into place. Now, they've just been on a very, very long journey. They're tired, they're weary, but as soon as Jesus breaks this bread and then disappears, because Jesus can disappear like that, they, rather than just sitting down and being like, oh, let's have a cup of tea and maybe we'll, get excited about this tomorrow, they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. So they go from being underwhelmed and dejected and sad, they just want to probably have a night's sleep and be a bit sad. They go from that to spending time with Jesus, him explaining things, and they're just like, right, we need to go back. This is so exciting and so cool. Jesus is risen. We need to go back and tell the other disciples. And it's not like a 2-minute walk down the road. It is a journey. So they were so underwhelmed, and yet with spending time with Jesus, they are filled with this excitement, this urge to go back and tell the other disciples. And with Mary, Mary squared, I've written Mary, and Salome, they're overwhelmed at the tomb. And then we see later on in the passage, like verses 9 and 10, Mary goes back to the tomb, and Jesus appears to her. And this time, when Jesus appeared to her and said, look, I'm risen, it's me. Go and tell the other disciples. This time, we see that she does it. And so what we can see here is that in both of these situations, the disciples feeling really underwhelmed or really overwhelmed. And by spending time with Jesus, by walking with God, that was the solution to them both. And I guess the takeaway message is that we all get underwhelmed or overwhelmed. That is normal and that is human. The disciples who we can look up to and we can learn a lot from, they experience this in a very real way. I'm not good at ours. But yeah, it's human. And We can even, if you want to look at the Psalms, for example, the Psalms are just basically, there are so many of them, and it's basically like a heavenly host of emotions, all in like these 150 chapters. And we see humanity in every single, I didn't really plan this bit, I'm just talking, but yeah, the Psalms are a great place if you're feeling like, oh, well, I'm feeling this, but that, and you might feel, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this because of X, Y, Z, or this my fault for feeling this way, or, oh, well, if I know God loves me, then how can I possibly feel like this? Like in the Psalms, we see that, yeah, there is so much, every single character, the big people that we're like, oh, you look up to them in the Bible, but we see that they're human and they have these emotions and feelings too, and that is okay and that is normal. And when often the Psalms will start off with, oh God, like what am I doing in my life type stuff. I don't have an example here, but it's true. And then by the end, lots of them are like, but God, I know I can trust in you. I think that's the key, is that when we're feeling underwhelmed and overwhelmed, we can look to God. And I'm not trying to say, like it's a hand-wavy magic trick, like, God, pew, and then suddenly everything's okay. That's not how it works. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, if someone says to me, oh, but, it's okay because God, that I know for a fact that doesn't always feel like it helps in any way or sense of the term. I'm not trying to say that your feelings don't matter because we can just say, oh yeah, God, it's fine. But what I'm saying is that it's power. When you're feeling underwhelmed and low and dejected, there is power in saying, God, I'm feeling empty and flat. I'm feeling underwhelmed, and I can't feel you right now. I can't see you right now. But God, meet me in this. And there's power in saying, God, everything is just too much. I can't cope. My headspace is just not there. And I need you, but also I can't do this. Will you meet me in this? There is so much power in being able to do that. Because God is an overwhelming God, and he cares and he knows about these things before we even say a word or think a thought. And he loves to be with us. And so yeah, I guess when we're feeling underwhelmed and overwhelmed, it's to remember that it's normal and that it's okay, and that Jesus' disciples had the same things as well, and that we can look to the Bible and see other people going through similar stuff. And also being able to pray with one another, that can be a really helpful thing. And I'm kind of waffling on in a weird circle, so I'm just going to end with this, end where we started with the wombles, but slightly changed. And it's a bit cheesy, but so rather than underground, overground, wombling free, underwhelmed, overwhelmed, in God we are free, because he is an overwhelming God, and that's exciting. And whoop whoop. You're welcome, Annabelle. 'Cause you said